And we're live with
And we're
Gilbo
live.
Hanging.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Aggressive Pacifist Podcast, brought to you by Free Speech Media, where speech is as free as speech should be, which is free. So tonight, Gilbo and I are going to talk about something that you don't really get taught in schools, which is very unfortunate because they give you this very tertiary knowledge of it and then they move on like it's an unimportant thing. But before we get on to Executive Order 9066, what it was, who signed it, and why it's important, the first thing we're going to do is just say, what's going on, Gilbo Gaggins?
What's going on, man?
Oh, just a lot, just a lot. We got a nice show for the folks. Hey, and before we get too far into this, Gaggies, can you go ahead and do a quick audio check for us on the stream? Just make sure we're coming through as we should be. Because the last thing I want is to have an audio issue yet again.
So I am on the checking her out right now.
So,
yep, audio is good.
Audio's good? Beautiful. Well, if the audio's good, we're going to go ahead and power right ahead. So, we're going to talk about the Executive Order 9066, which was signed in 1942 by Roosevelt. We're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, and what kind of implications it has for us, and what we should have learned from it that we haven't. So, Gilbo, why don't you go ahead and give us a little place to start here? Or actually, here, do you want me to start? I'll start. Fuck you. Fuck you. I love
Do
you.
it up.
I love you, but I fuck you. So, as a reaction to Pearl Harbor, which we all know that was definitely not Cuba Gooding Jr.'s best movie, Pearl Harbor. And I don't really know where to go with it from there. But 9066, it was an executive order that came out that basically was pointed right at Japanese Americans. It came out on February 19th, 1942, and it was issued by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it granted the Secretary of War and his commanders the power to prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent as he or the appropriate military commander may determine, from which any or all persons may be excluded. Now, they didn't really say specifically, we're not going to let the Japs anywhere. They just said, we're going to make it so we can take anyone where they are. And if you look at just kind of the propaganda that was going on at the time, they were calling Japanese Americans the Japs. Just think of the propaganda that was going on. You know, these are Americans. These are people who live amongst us. They pay taxes. They go to our schools. They contribute to American society. And rather than honoring them and giving them, the constitutional rights that they were guaranteed as American citizens, nope, you're the Japs. You go to a camp. So take it from there, Gilbo.
Well, so after the events at Pearl Harbor, FDR then signs this executive order to essentially put Japanese Americans, whether they're in the process of becoming citizens or that, 2/3 of them were already citizens. And they were essentially prisoners to their own country. And I think the numbers were fairly rough, but between 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned between February 19th of 1942 and March 20th of 1946 under this wartime civil control administration, quote unquote. And it all stemmed from, the popular support from Pearl Harbor. Well, given the popular support of the American people to go and get into World War II as a result of Pearl Harbor, a lot of Americans had a very strange sentiment about what FDR was doing. And they were very, the conditions were heavily speculated because there was, it happened so fast, it happened so rapidly. Your neighbor who's been in the country for 45, 50 years, even a generation or two, is still considered to be a Japanese American. They were ripped from their homes. They were taken from their workplaces. Their families were uprooted, and they were brought and relocated. They were brought to relocation camps, and FDR even used the term concentration camp. And it changed people's lives, and it brought a very distasteful sentiment in America, even amongst other Americans.
Well, and it really should have. I mean, when we look at what Executive Order 9066 did, it created about 12 concentration camps, or 10, excuse me. So the first concentration camps or internment camps, depending on which word you want to use, you could also call them a prison camp, and that would be accurate as well. Well, the first one in operation was in Manzanar, and that's in Southern California. That was all of these camps were constructed between 1942 and 1945, and there were a total of 10 camps that were opened, and they held approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans for, varying periods of time, as they call it. You get varying periods of time for your jail sentence, and you were held in these places for them. And they were throughout California, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. And it's really one of those amazing things that how does this happen? How do we in America allow our own government to just fuck you? Fuck you. You know what? Some people who look like you but aren't you did a crime, so we're going to put you in a cage. And it's not even that they just put them in a cage. They took their entire family and put their entire family in a cage. And then they took everyone who looked like they could even somehow be related to them and threw them in a cage. Go ahead, Gilbo.
Well, if you look back through FDR's presidency, it's riddled with tyranny. It's riddled with operations conducted behind closed doors, with secret meetings and a whole bunch of BS. So if you recall FDR was the authoritator, if you will, of the New Deal. He was also the only president to serve 3 terms. He was the president during the Great Depression, and many Americans would argue back through history that FDR plunged us into World War II to drive us out of the Depression through producing weapons, producing goods to ship overseas to Great Britain, France, some of the Allied powers. But there's a lot of speculation that they were funding both sides, especially if you get into the Prescott-Bush theory, where essentially Prescott-Bush was funding the Nazis, that being George Bush's grandfather. And there's a lot of fuckery that's going on. There's a lot of ulterior motives to the U.S. getting into the war and, everything that happened after that.
So, since you mentioned the Prescott-Bush thing, actually, let me go ahead and say that that's not just a conspiracy thing. That's like a real thing. That he was caught, his bank was caught funding the Nazis. And if you own my book, A Parasite's Paradise, and you go to page 197, you will actually find evidence for this. So just a little plug there for you. You will find evidence of this. Page 197 on my book, A Parasite's Paradise. Available on Amazon or harrisoncamp.com right on the homepage. Because yes, that is true. He worked for a bank he was a manager for a bank that ended up getting busted in court, funding the Nazis, giving them funds, as you would say. And nothing ever really came of it, because it wasn't his money. It was the bank's money. It was an investment. So nothing ever really came of it. Plus, when you're that high connected, nothing ever really comes of your troubles anyway. They already know you're going to get in trouble. They already know what you're doing. Now, you were talking about Roosevelt. So I had this on the screen for everyone who's watching, but let me go through it for you real quick. As Gilbo said, FDR was president 3 terms from 1933 to 1945. He was president for 12 years, and he presided over 75% of the Great Depression. And if it wasn't for him and his actions, the Great Depression probably could have been over a lot sooner. I mean, his expansions of government that he took were unprecedented. And then not only were the expansions of government during the New Deal unprecedented, but he's the same guy who went out there and just threw a whole bunch of people into a giant fenced-in cage. And you can't say that, oh, you're a good guy because you tried to solve this economic problem, even though you did this other really bad thing. Because why wouldn't we look at it as what it is, Gilbo? Like, why wouldn't we just look at it as he's this guy who does whatever seems advantageous to him at the time, and it was clearly advantageous to him at the time, to pass something that increases the size and scope of the government. Not that ends the Depression, but that
Well, right. And
increases his
that was the
power.
whole premise of the Wagner Act in 35. It astronomically increased the authority of the federal government in not only industrial relations, but it strengthened the organizing power of labor unions. And there's a whole slew of other issues that had then brought up, considering a quarter of the workforce at the time was unemployed. A caveat to the Wagner Act was then moving forward with unemployment compensation, disability insurance, maximum work hours, and the biggest thing there being minimum wage. And that was set into certain and most industries back in 1938. But Roosevelt just said, I'm just going to take America and fuck it in any direction that I see fit. And with a ton of government overreach, he was able to do that.
He was able to basically just take the roaring 20s. And yes, we had started the Great Depression before he came. Like, economists recognize that it started around 1929. I think it was June is when it was first really kind of recognized as this is when it started. But they don't ever recognize that a depression is hitting as it's hitting. It's always post haste. It's always afterward. Now, you're always going to have some people who are able to predict that a bubble is about to burst because they have sound economic theory and they're looking at the data and they're saying, there's no way this bubble isn't going to burst. Mises was calling it. Today we've got Peter Schiff calling it. We've got Bob Murphy calling it. So, there's always people who are going to call it, but the state itself never recognizes a bubble is coming because they have too much confidence in themselves, to be honest. And now, so we can't blame all of the Great Depression on FDR, but we can blame the worst parts of it on FDR. And during all of this, they had put out these memos, these instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry who lived in certain areas. And this was the law for them. They had to follow this. If they didn't go to the camp it told them to go to, if they didn't report to the bureau it told them to report to, they would be arrested. They were treated as criminals and they hadn't even been charged with anything. They were just, you're of Japanese ancestry. That's it. That's the whole crime, the whole thing that's going on here. And so now, Gilbo, the War Relocation Authority that was granted on March 18th of 1942, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know about this. Its mission, it was to take all people of Japanese descent into custody, surround them with troops, and prevent them from buying land, and then return them to their former homes at the end of the war. That was what the War Relocation Authority, or WRA, as it's most affectionately known, was its job. That was a government agency.
Right. So looking back at that particular point in time in history, and all of this massive change, all of this massive authoritarian reach, if you will, basically the federal government being able to mandate certain things in the workforce. They're essentially attempting to take over the labor portion of the economy by having all of these strict mandates, by having all of these rules and regulations, if you will. Yet the only thing that was officially deemed unconstitutional about the New Deal was in 1936, the Supreme Court declared the AAA be unconstitutional, stating that a statutory plan to regulate and control agricultural production is a matter that goes beyond powers delegated to the federal government. If you said that nowadays, people would say, you're fucking crazy. Of course it belongs to the federal government. That's just 80 years.
Right.
But it's beyond powers delegated. See back then what was such a massive amount of overreach nowadays would be something that happened under the table that you never heard about. Because that's how far we've digressed over the last 80 years as far as losing freedoms and civil liberties and essentially having a small, non-invasive government.
No one ever even talks about, well, we don't have that right. We don't have that authority as a federal government. People don't talk about that. Like Ron Paul talked about it. Thomas Massey talks about it sometimes. But that's really it, man. Like on the national stage, that's really it. I mean, a lot of good thinkers, you've got your activists, your authors who say things like that. But politicians don't. They don't think about those anymore. And, it used to actually be that the Constitution was taken into account before a new law was created, a new bill was made, a new fucking spending package was put together, a new executive order was pushed down the line. The Constitution used to be taken into account. It's just not anymore. And so I'll say, like, yeah, it sucks that all they were able to say, oh, well, this is the only part that is unconstitutional. It should have all been obviously unconstitutional, but you know how they got away with it is by saying, like, oh, well, there's a grave danger and it's within the president's right. Like, they have the obvious right to protect and defend the nation and take action to do so. And this is a national security risk. So what is the parallel between that and where we're at today? I think it's fairly obvious. We're at this point where the government is simply saying, hey, we have this great health risk, and as a result of that, we're going to tell you how you can and can't run your business, when you can and can't be open, how many people you can and can't serve. We're going to tell you how you can and can't live your life and how you can and can't interact with your loved ones and your family. And we really need to reevaluate our relationship with the state. And that's why, like, the citizens initiative that we got, right? People don't understand this, but according to Maine state law, it's Title 37B. It's off the top of my head, they say subchapter 13, chapter 2. And that is the executive powers that the governor has. Everything they're allowed to do. They're allowed to literally make you leave your land, make you leave your farm, and move to some type of friggin' healthcare center so that they can take care of you. They can also conscript you. They can say, hey, we're in a state of emergency. I have the power to make you go to work for me, to make you work to help stop this virus. It's right in the frickin' law. And there's also no sunset on this. Like, there's no time limit. We could just remain under this for as long as she's a governor. And there's also no way for the legislature to come in and stop it. There's just nothing there for them to do. So that's why we need to take the action to reevaluate that. So that way we don't have a modern day situation where, oh, well, you don't want to vaccinate? Oh, that's fine. You can just, here, go live over in this camp where all the non-vaccinated people are. And that can be your spot.
It's like, well, no. And to draw kind of a parallel between where we are now in the history of America and where we were back in the 30s. So certain historians would argue that the New Deal could be considered a success in that it is to prevent economic depressions and, it sets a precedent to provide temporary relief to folks during an emergency. However, if you look at the effects of the New Deal, some of the New Deal's programs helped improve the lives of people very short term. But in the long run, and we're still seeing the effects of this today, it's how far the federal government has gotten into social affairs of the nation, whether it be welfare programs, whether it be pushing towards socialized healthcare, whether it be the government just gaining a monopoly on literally anything and everything. so that they can control that one aspect. If you look at roads, if you look at healthcare, if you look at regulations on alcohol or tobacco, taxes accordingly, they've basically just embedded themselves in every aspect of the economy so that they can regulate every aspect of the economy.
Yeah,
And
I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
well, I had to take a break for a second because they're talking about now, with AOC and the squad, the new Green Deal. So they realized that there was a parallel between the New Deal and that point in time in American history, and now in American history, where people are shook, people are looking for an escape, and if you can coerce them into believing that one document can get them out of whatever stage of their life that they're in which they're uncomfortable, economically, physically, monetarily, whatever the case may be, people are uncomfortable and they're looking for that out. They're looking for the one cure-all, the one fucking umbrella that's going to take all of their problems away. And they're like, oh, well, if we just do this, blah, 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 everything will magically get better. Well, through implementation of stimulus checks or more socialized medicine, healthcare, whatever, is that really going to benefit us as a country? And then if you get into, kind of flying off the rails a little bit here, but Joe Biden saying that, these $1,400 stimulus checks are going to bring us out of poverty. Well, Joe, you don't know what poverty is. If you look back to the Depression, the American people were impoverished. If $1,400 can get people out of poverty, you're not in fucking poverty. I'm sorry to tell you, but you're not in poverty. You're just irresponsible with your money. And if $1,400 can drastically improve your lifestyle, then you're not on the right track anyways.
Right. I think that right now the biggest problem we have going on is simply that people just have too much faith in their elected officials, and a lot of people want to say like, oh, Canada's a great country. Canada freaking has all this healthcare and rights, and they don't have any guns. And well, you know what? Fuck you, because Canada interned the Japanese people during World War II for the same reason that the Americans did. They interned some 21,000 Japanese Canadians. And on February 24th, 1942, around 12,000 of those 21,000 Japanese people were exiled to very remote parts of British Columbia. I don't know if you've ever been to British Columbia, because I certainly haven't, but according to the Nature Channel, it's very harsh living up there.
And that's what I've heard as well. And we could probably get into Canada's healthcare reform or lack thereof and all of that stuff on a different show, but it basically just goes to show you through some of the World War II era policies and through the implementation of the New Deal that more government is not in fact better for the people, the citizens, if we're still citizens, or for the governed class, which would better represent the people of that time, the governed class.
Yeah, the governed class is really who the government gets its consensus from. If the government doesn't have the consensus of the taxed, then they don't have the consent of the governed. And if you don't have their consent, you are not a government. You're some kind of monarchy, you're some kind of monopoly, you're some kind of
some type of coercive authoritarian dictator. I mean,
right,
the list
you're
goes.
an oligarchy, you're a dictatorship, but you're not a representative democracy, a republic. You're not what we consider a government. And if you want to be considered a government, that's okay. You just have to give away all the powers people don't want. And that can be very difficult because people want different things. Not everybody wants the government to have the same powers. So, how do you deal with that? What is a government to do? Nothing. They're to do nothing. I've had someone this week who said to me, "Oh, well, why do you think we have seatbelt laws? It's to protect you." And I go, "Do you really think we have seatbelt laws to protect you? Do you really think that the fucking state pulls you over, sends an armed man up to your door, who then wants to fucking hunt through your car to look to see what other crimes they can come up with? Do you really think the state is doing that to protect you? If you do, then I got something to sell you, because you're dumber than a bag of dicks."
Right. It's a simple means. It's a way for them to collect revenue. If they see you driving around without a seatbelt on, even if you're going the speed limit, that then gives them a reason to pull you over, to question you, to see if you've had anything to drink tonight, so that they can look around your car and look for any reason possible to upsell you on that traffic stop. They go, "Oh, well, had I not turned around and ripped behind you, I would have never known that you have a license plate light bulb out, or that your registration is overdue by 10 minutes, or that X, Y, and Z." They look for ways to upsell you. And what do? They write you a ticket. They present you with a fine. And it's an amount of money that you have to pay to the state for whatever your infraction may be. Even if your infraction has absolutely nothing to do with the harm, discontent, or or if you're not inhibiting anyone else's ability to travel, you're not inhibiting anybody else's will. It's simply because you have not met all of the rules and regulations of the state. And you could end up with a $1,200 to $1,500 ticket based upon all of these upsells for strictly not wearing your seatbelt. That's the initiating cause.
Yeah, and so let's say that, like, whenever people want to say, "Oh, these seatbelt laws," for instance, let's just stick on seatbelt laws because they're a very mundane one. But what happens when you get pulled over for a seatbelt law? At best, you get a warning, right? But before
Usually,
you get a warning, you are temporarily arrested. You are not allowed to leave, because if you try to leave, then you're a criminal, even though all you've done so far is nothing, right? Because if you do, say you're not wearing a seatbelt and you get in an accident, who gets hurt from that?
the only person that's affected is you. But
You.
you're also maintaining and ensuring your own right to liberty. If you want to wear a seatbelt and you get into a crash, outstanding. If you elected to not utilize your seatbelt and you get into a crash, well, guess what? Common sense is going to say, hey, if I'm doing 60 and I crash into a deer, I'm probably going to go through the windshield if I'm not wearing a seatbelt. However, the government shouldn't have to mandate or tell me that that is what's best for me. You should have enough common sense to be able to come to that conclusion without there being a monetary penalty for you not adhering to it.
Right. And that's like, I have a lot of people who say things to me like, "Oh, so people need to be told to wear a mask because we need to be told. What part of the CDC recommendations do you recommend violating?" Yada, yada. And I'm like, I don't make any recommendations about your health. That is not what I'm doing. I mean, if you look at the charts, like, it's very hard to tell when mandates go in, when they don't. It's very hard. You can look at states that have mask mandates, states that are fully open, and the numbers are pretty much the same. Florida's been open for a while now, and they're very average. Well, when Florida was opening up, nobody said they were going to be average. Nobody was concerned about their averageness. They were concerned about the freaking death storm that was about to come down. Like, the Death Star had just focused itself right over Florida and was going to focus all of its attention there. But no, what ended up happening instead is that California, a place that has some of the most severe lockdowns and restrictions, actually they're doing a little bit worse than Florida on net, and they actually have a much younger population. So there's no way to say what works and what doesn't right now. They just came out and the CDC has said at various points during all of this, masks work, masks don't work, masks work. Don't wear a mask if you're more than 6 feet apart. If you're young and healthy, you don't need to wear a mask at all unless you want to be socially conscious. There's all these different nuances that we've been told, and everybody just goes with what's the last thing I heard. What's the last little bit I heard from Fox or CNN, or what Dr. Shaw say? And my point isn't disregard the healthcare professionals. My point is listen to them and then make the decision for yourself. They're
Exactly.
not czars.
Right. They're simply folks that go on the news and profess their beliefs. Their beliefs do not have to be your beliefs. You should take the information of quote unquote professionals, right? You take the information given to you and you sit there and you think about it and you go, is this reasonable considering everything that I know? And if you go, this is lunacy, why are people doing this? Then you probably have had an original thought in your life and you're not just going with the masses.
Right. You need to think about what is the actual implications of this. Like when we're talking about the lockdowns, for instance, let's not just talk about the implications of, oh, I've got to wear a mask and it's a little harder to go to the grocery store, and carry out is more convenient than ever. Like let's get around all of those basic things and let's really think about what this is going to mean in the long term. It's going to mean in the long term that like over 1 million kids are going to die from starvation because of food shortages that have been caused from production shortages during the last year. That's a lot of kids. That's more kids than are going to end up dying from the corona by a very large margin, from my understanding. And not only is it more kids that are going to die from the corona, but when you factor in years lost, we're going to lose more years in the children who are lost from starvation than we're going to lose in the amount of people who are lost from the corona. Now, that number could not be correct, but from my last reading, that is what I had read, and I think that was in the Lancet. So
Right.
there's just so many different things to take into account here. So it's like, what's the metric we want to use? Do we want to look at deaths? Do we want to look at contagions? Do we want to look at years lost? And if we're going to look at years lost, I think that might actually be the best metric, because what that's doing is taking into account the amount of people and the amount of time that people are actually losing during this. So if you're dying from a cause that's not corona, but is related to the corona lockdowns, like starvation, for instance, then you're probably going to be in a poor country. You're probably going to be younger because you don't have the choice. You don't work. So you're going to starve, and then next thing you know, you've lost, say, 50 years of life. But somebody who dies of corona, the average age of dying from corona is right around the same age that the average age of life is in the United States. So we're not really statistically losing much time on that. And before people go, oh, I can't believe you're putting statistical measures on lives. Companies do that all the time. You do that all the time. And like insurance companies do that. And then you do that when you buy an insurance policy. If somebody came to you and said, hey, I'll give you $5 million if you play one round of Russian roulette, and you go ahead and play that game, you just put a value on your life. And if you say, no, I'll do it for 100 million, you just put a value on your life. People put monetary values on a life all the time, and they do it to themselves. And anytime you get an insurance policy, you've just done it. So don't act like it's some crazy, creepy thing to do. That's literally everyday life.
Right. It's a fairly normal interaction in society.
Yeah, if you're not going around and actually trying to, whoa. Okay, if someone is vaccinated, they can't get a virus from someone who is not vaccinated? If they would, wouldn't that person be stupid to even get a vaccine? Same as if you wear a mask, you do not have to care if someone else wears it. You're protected, right? If not, why not wear a face diaper? Okay, this person's being sarcastic. Never mind. I just had a comment pop up in my news feed as I was looking for comments on our video here, and I started reading that thing, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe someone thinks this." And then I realized it was sarcasm.
Oh, sarcasm does run the world, does rule the world, doesn't it?
It does. It has a definite place. So, Gilbo, let me ask you, because I think we're just kind of bambling at this point. We're not necessarily talking about the executive order anymore. Now, we are 1 week away from our 1 year anniversary of the lockdown.
That we are, good sir. That we are.
Yep, Governor Mills made her first announcement, emergency executive order, on March 15th, 2020. So we're 1 week away from 1 year out from 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Now we've gone a year to bone your asshole. That's pretty much what it's been.
So, Gilbo, do you have any final thoughts?
Do I have any final thoughts on the corona or on the coercive message of the New Deal, or
I don't know. Just do you have a thought? Go ahead and put your thought out. I'm pretty much out of thoughts.
I suppose in closing, my final thoughts are: people can't sit there and preach patriotism as blind allegiance to the state when our government, the United States government, has perpetrated just as dastardly of deeds as that of the Nazi regime, as that of the Soviet regime, and other regimes of that time. The Nazis had concentration camps. We had concentration camps. We subverted human rights. We treated people like shit. We treated people like subhuman individuals. Just because we didn't get the worldwide publicity of it does not make us any better of a people for doing it. And that's in pertinence to, the Japanese concentration camps. Moving forward with the New Deal, I think it's just another authoritarian outreach as far as the federal government taking power and exploiting that power. And with the corona, it's just another way for them to create a disaster. And then through that disaster, they find a means to reach out and say, hey, we need to take more control over this aspect of your life or this aspect of your life because we're doing it for the good of you. When in the long run, especially from what you and I have seen in the small business world, it's not for the good of the little guy at all.
No, it's definitely not for the good of the little guy. They do this, and I'm not always going to say that there are nefarious means afoot. Like, I'm not always saying villainy is afoot. I am, however, saying that there's always incompetence and bad ideas afoot. Even the best person who is in the position to be an elected representative, there's one of you out of 534. You're outnumbered. And there's a lot of really, really bad ideas that have a lot of public support because it feels good. Just like Executive Order 9066. It felt good. We're going to keep people safe. We were attacked. Never mind that the attack was blowback, and never mind that Japan even said we could never attack the U.S. mainland because there's a rifle behind every blade of grass. We wouldn't stand a chance. But just think about, I want people to remember what your government has done in the past. That's the whole reason we talked about this tonight, was to kind of remind you of what your government's done in the past, how far they've gone, all in the alleged best interest of the American citizen, while at the same time violating the rights of the American citizen. So we implore you to please look into Executive Order 9066 more. Please go do a more academic and scholarly dive into it. We hope you have enjoyed this introduction to it. Make sure you check us out every Monday right here at 7 p.m. on facebook.com/free speech media. This is the Aggressive Pacifist, brought to you by the Free Speech Media Network. Check it. Come back at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, the Johnny Lemuria show is on. He's got a great little show. And I actually will be having him on my interview show coming up in the near future. I'd like to talk to him. He is a very interesting gentleman, and I can't wait to learn more from him. Go ahead, Jared, give your final plugs. Where can the folks find you, Gilly?
So you can find us at the Aggressive Pacifist Podcast on Spotify, wherever else you can find us. Big thing is Facebook. Feel free to hit us up on the Facebook page, the Aggressive Pacifist Podcast, the Free Main Pact, and anything else you wanted to add to that, Harrison?
Just no, I'm good. Just that Pearl Harbor was a really shitty movie.
Cuba Gooding Jr. should have been freaking sacked for his role in that.
Yeah, I'm mad that was ever made, but that's a different podcast for a different day.
That is. We've had some information for you, so go ahead and digest it, look it up, fact check us. We encourage it. We don't discourage people having their own opinions and reading into things for themselves. That's how you grow as a person. And if you believe the official narrative 9 times out of 10, you're fucking wrong. And that's all I got for tonight.
I will say I disagree. I don't want people to have their own opinions. I want them to all hold exactly my opinions. That's how we have a perfect world. Have a good one, folks.